Hello and welcome to this episode of India and the World on DeKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. The funeral of the former supreme leader of Iran, who was killed by American and Israeli strikes earlier this year, is going to take place beginning the 4th of July and will last for a course of several days actually in Iran. And there has been a lot of debate about the delegation that India has decided to send there to represent the government of India. Now, in fact, the government today has announced officially that the Bihar governor, Atta Hasnain, and the Minister of State in the External Affairs Ministry are both going to be representing India officially at the funeral prayers. We also know that Salman Khurshid, the foreign minister of India, has gone separately and has is decided to represent the opposition Congress party. The Iranians had reached out to several opposition leaders and MPs as well, apart from actually originally extending the invitation to Prime Minister Modi. Now, why has this sparked a debate? It's simply because India does have old civilizational ties with Iran. It's a very important relationship. But this time, when the war actually began between Iran and the United States, if you remember, Prime Minister Modi was in Israel on the eve of those strikes. And it literally happened within a day or so of his returning to India. There was a perceived pro Israel tilt in India's position in the beginning. And later on, there was clearly an attempt to course correct that. However, many experts do believe that India should have sent a higher level delegation, perhaps the vice president, with a much larger group to convey India's position on Iran, and that perhaps India has not done that because it doesn't want to antagonize Washington. Is there any truth to that? Is Washington really influencing India's Iran policy? Is Delhi wary of annoying Donald Trump in any way? Joining us on the program to talk about that first is a former ambassador to France and former High Commissioner to Singapore, Jawed Ashraf, who's also worked with Prime Minister Modi closely in the Prime Minister's office. Great to have you, Jawed Ashraf, on the program today. What's your take on the delegation that officially represents the government to this funeral?
Well, I think, this is the debate has been sparked, what you were referring to, in part because of the way the war has evolved and the positions we have taken and the expectations of, the positions that people thought should have been taken and perceived departures from those positions in the past. I think that, it is less important to focus on the what is the composition of the delegation? Should we have gone at a higher level? Because what's important is to see how we are going to build this relationship going forward. Now, if a lot of people would compare this with the our participation during the funeral of the president of Iran who died in an helicopter crash and compare it with this, and supreme leader obviously occupies a much higher level of position in the
Also, the head of state.
public as the head of the state. And no, it's beyond even the head of state. It's like a spiritual leader. It has a deeply psychological and emotional value. They see it as a martyrdom taking place after 1600 years in the Shiite tradition. So all of that is important. But remember, this is happening in the context of a war, or as a consequence of the war, and there are multiple actors or states involved in this conflict. Notwithstanding, the provocations, justification, or lack of it, there is the United States, there is Israel, there are the Gulf countries who are deeply and directly involved, and then there is Iran. And I think the way the government would be looking at it is to see how they balance this position. Because even though there is perhaps a ceasefire at the moment, which is highly fragile, sometimes not there, and not all the stakeholders have actually bought into it. Some have done it for tactical reasons, others because they have had no choice to in it. So it's still it's a very raw situation. We still have very deep feelings and positions among all the stakeholders involved in this conflict, and therefore, the message perhaps that is being sent is that we need to take into account all the sentiments of all the stakeholders, our interests with all of them, and I don't think that it
Sure.
is really a question of looking at it purely from the perspective of the United States. It is also
Can I
about
ask? Can I ask you though that I know you said perhaps you said that the composition of the delegation should
mm,
not be the focus. It should really be
mm,
on the substance of the
mm,
India-Iran relationship.
mm.
But symbolism does matter,
No,
and
symbolism does, yeah. So I'm saying
yeah.
the
So
symbolism is
when you
perhaps
mentioned the
because
Iranian president who died a few years
yeah.
ago in a helicopter crash, at that
Mm,
time it was a delegation led by the vice president of
mm,
India. This was
mm,
an invitation extended to Prime Minister Modi. And of course, we understand Mr. Modi already has commitments. He's traveling to Australia and
mm.
so on. Um, so one doesn't fault the Prime Minister for not going, but surely it could have been at a higher level
No,
than.
as I said,
I,
as I say, the difference between the two situations, Nidhi, is that one was a normal civilian in context in which a head of the state, I mean, the president died in an air crash. This has taken place as a consequence of, and in the context of a conflict in which a number of countries with which India has friendly relations or has deep strategic interests are involved in this. And
But it's
therefore,
also
what,
it's also a conflict. Sorry to interrupt. It's also a conflict where the aggressors were clearly the United States and Israel. I mean, they provoked this, and I understand that India is not going to come out and criticize that openly. But we also seem to take a position in the beginning which was tilted the other way, which was very heavily tilted towards Israel.
yeah, so
So
I want to leave
that
that
wasn't right.
question aside because I think enough has been said. Even I have written about the the issue about silence and taking sides. I wrote two articles on this in the Sun Times, and I'm saying that look, nothing can take away the fact that Iran will be, it's beyond civilizational links. There are civilizational links, but there is also deep interest involved with Iran. You can substitute the oil you buy from them, you can substitute some of the other products that you take from them, but you can't take away the geographic and strategic importance of Iran for two reasons. One, that they do sit on the mouth of and literally today control the Strait of Hormuz. And second, that your relationship with continental Eurasia or continental Asia and your links to that region is vitally dependent upon access through Iran. You're not going to get that access through Pakistan and Afghanistan. They have to get it through. And that was the genesis of the international north south transit corridor, Chabahar linking up to Afghanistan, to Turkmenistan. And so, if you have a policy towards, let's say, Central Asia or Eurasia, and if you want to develop alternative trade links to Russia and to Europe, Iran remains important. Otherwise, we are confined to the maritime domain insofar as this part of the world is concerned, and we completely lose out on this. So, both because of where it is located, and it sits right where really are it's in the immediate neighborhood. We think of immediate neighborhood at South Asia. You need to expand that and think of where they are as geographic importance, and because of where they are with regard to our energy supply lines. And the second thing, as I said, is the Eurasian continental. And finally,
But,
if you look at the geopolitics of the region, let me conclude this.
yeah.
Why I'm linking this up is even geopolitically, if you look at all the countries in this continental landmass, which has historically been of great consequence for our country, for our region, you would see that Iran is a very important swing factor there, and we need to remain engaged. The big question going forward will be, because here you have a relationship with Gulf countries that have been also at the receiving end of this of Iran. You have relations with Israel. You have relations with the United States. Leave aside for the moment the moral question of aggressor. Leave aside the unprovoked nature of the war. Leave aside the kind of damage that has been caused by an unprovoked war on Iran. Leave aside those questions. We have often spoken about it. With you, I've spoken about it. But I'm saying that what the government perhaps try to do is here that maintain that semblance, maintain a certain kind of a link. It had choices. It could have, first, the invitation will always be sent to the head of government in India. it's the head of government and decides who goes over there. So it's not like the invitation is personal, particularly to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It is addressed to the head of government, and he decides who goes there. So there are reasons why I think we've chosen Sayyid Ada Hosnain, which is, he's senior enough, but he's also an important Shiite figure in the country. Also because, and then you have the Minister of State, former Minister Salman Khurshid, who's gone there. I think what is important to focus on is that when you look at the strategic landscape of this region, then you have four consequences. One is that you would have to,
Before I come to the four consequences, just to recap then, because you have
mm,
laid out very nicely why Iran matters to India and
yeah,
why it has and why it continues to matter. But it appears, therefore, I mean, you're a good diplomat, which is why you use diplomatic language. But the bottom line seems to be we don't want to antagonize the Americans beyond a point, right? So we're sending a delegation is just not at the level that would frankly
I
piss
would
off.
say that, maybe perhaps it's as much the our friends in the Gulf and maybe Israel also, because I mean the nature of hostility currently between, let's say, UAE and Iran is extraordinary. I mean, two neighbors, and at some point they'll have to find a modus vivendi to work together, because and I've written this long time back, that using this external powers to balance regional asymmetries is less a deterrent and more a trigger for a conflict. And it has been shown to be so, that the Gulf countries relied on the United States to as act as as a strategic deterrent against Iran. It didn't quite work the way they would have liked to. So they may eventually find a modus vivendi. What I'm saying is that that I said there are multiple relationships involved in this. It's a very complex situation. I know that the sentiments were very strong in the Gulf region. I may disagree with or agree with the position that we may take on this, but I think that's the way it is. Now, what do we do going forward? We do need to continue to find a way to repair and, you know, develop our relations with Iran. There's no question about it. Is this good enough? Does the symbolism matter? Yes, it matters. Are we sending a sufficiently high delegation? This question would not have arisen if our initial position hadn't been under the scrutiny that it has been,
Exactly.
and
That's the
therefore it has got linked to it. I think I would focus on the life beyond the funeral. Iran is also a very mature power. It will also be guided somewhat by emotions, but also by its interests. And if it sees in the future that it needs India, and that a relationship with India is important for it, it will also reach out. I mean, I have dealt with it when I was in the Prime Minister's office, and it has a very kind of a, shall I say, a very mature, very sometimes a very
pragmatic.
uh, pragmatic and a very resilient sort of approach to relationships, and
Well,
it calculates well, unemotional about it at times. So
I
let's
think that's
look.
a good point. I think that's a good point that you make. And interestingly, when you were talking about the churn that this entire war has caused
Hmm,
within the Gulf, just today the New York Times has a terrific story on how the Saudi crown prince has sort of turned on Trump in this war, from initially really supporting it to then
hmm,
becoming so wary
hmm.
and pulling back. I'll leave it there for now, Ambassador
No, but
Jawed
I
Ashraf.
wanted to add this, just
Yeah,
conclude this. But
yeah,
this
yeah,
in March, I had written the four basic conclusions.
yeah.
One, that Iran will not be defeated, and because it is resisted, it will emerge with strategic power, and its ability to control Hormuz will give it new strategic leverage. Two, that the Gulf countries would also realize that, as I said, that external balancer is of not much great help, and that they would need to not become an instrument of other countries in hostility towards Iran. And whatever differences they may have, they will have to find a modus vivendi. Israel will certainly feel a little more isolated than it was before. The United States may or may not face its 1956 moment as far as UK was concerned with in that crisis around the Suez. But US power and US influence in the region will certainly see a
Wayne.
diminution. And
Yeah.
therefore, the region is going to see a reordering of balance of power. You're already seeing that. And therefore, we need to. I'm not very concerned about whether Pakistan played a mediating role, didn't play a mediating role, etc. I mean, we have to look at our interests and purely clinically from that point of view. And I had written this in March that we must start doing alternative strategic scenario building and start looking at how we manage the relationships, that all of these multiple relationships that I'm talking about, in a new strategic environment where the old assumptions will no longer prevail and we'll have to get. And this is what I think beyond the
In so
funeral,
many ways,
we will
in
have to
so many,
go.
yeah, in so many ways, the story begins now, after the
Yes.
war. In so many
And,
ways, it does.
and that's going to be the test of our statecraft.
So, how much does it matter the composition of the delegation that India is sending to the former supreme leader of Iran's funeral? In fact, the Indian delegation, as we said, already been announced as the governor of Bihar and the minister of state for external affairs. But we also have former foreign minister Salman Khurshid, who's, as we speak now, on his way to Tehran, representing the Congress party separately. Let's talk to our esteemed panel for more on the India-Iran relationship and what all of this means. I'm very happy to welcome on the program with us Ambassador DP Srivastava, who has served as India's envoy to Iran and someone who has been very closely involved in improving that relationship between the two countries even more than ever. Dr. Waiel Awwad, a well-known journalist and West Asia strategist, is also joining us from Delhi, and Professor Christopher Clary is joining us from New York. He's an associate professor of political science at the University of Albany and is now also with the Stimson Center. Thank you very much to all of you for being with us. Ambassador Srivastava, what are your views then of the delegation that India is officially sending to Iran for this? Uh, do you think it should have had a higher level of representation? Does that matter?
I think it's not the level, but somebody who's who has empathy for Iran, knows that country, and I think General Atta Hassan fits the bill very well. He's, as you know, we have a connection. He's from my hometown, Lucknow, and is a Shia. But that is not that important. He has kept in touch with Iran, so I think it's a very good choice.
You don't think, though, that given that of course, the invitation went to the prime minister, and in the past, when the Iranian president died in the helicopter crash, which we were talking about earlier, just a few years ago, it was the Indian vice president that led the delegation. Today, it's not at that level at all. It You don't think that that sends a message that India's kind of still tiptoeing around its relationship with Tehran?
I won't put it that way. I would have, of course, preferred that Prime Minister found some time to visit Iran on this solemn occasion. But he has many responsibilities. So I think in the event, General Atta Hassan is a very good choice. And uh, he's reinforced also by, I think, they have extended invitations to different parties. I understand they have invited BJP president, they invited Congress president. If Mr. Salman Khurshid is going, that again is a very good choice. Um, he is familiar with Iran, and we have a consensus on foreign policy.
Dr. Wailawat, what are your thoughts on that? Because the sense was, again, that in a sense, India aligned itself with Israel when this war started. And today, there seems to be a feeling amongst many who are foreign policy watchers that India is very wary of upsetting Donald Trump. And hence, um, even though Ambassador Srivastava says that General Hasnain is a good choice, it's not about him as a person. But also, does it not matter the level at which you send a delegation to Iran? Is this not something that Iran would notice?
Well, absolutely. I believe it is a more of a calibrated diplomatic move by India, trying to balance between its regional strategic allies with the new allies that they have created with Israel and the United States. And they feel that this is the way they should have done it. And I believe if we look at the historical ties, Nidhi, between India and Iran, we all know that it is a very historic relationship between two civilizations. Over the years, they have cemented this relation, and there is a strategic partnership between the two countries. However, the after the war, India definitely have taken the side, or looks like in the Arab eyes and the Iranian, that they were not even a neutral in this. It's a more of a leaning toward the American and the Israeli point of view. But I believe after 4 or 5 days, the Indian have made up their mind. And I believe more on this, that it is more of a symbolic. It's a symbolic that you should send a high-level delegation to such kind of a place. A, because he is a religious leader beyond the border of Iran. You have lots of sentiment and respect even among the Shia community in India, which is exceeding more than 50 million people. And also you have a strong ties with the with India. And I think that would have given a strong message for the future relation with Iran rather than the current situation, because Iran calculate every steps of every country, and such kind of gesture from the Iranian sending to the Indian decision maker and the highest of the prime minister. It's also a message to the neighbors of Iran that it matters a lot, the relation between India and Iran.
Professor Clary, do you see it in a similar way that it's primarily India, then maybe still wary about upsetting Trump? We have very sort of delicate trade talks going on. We have clearly got a much closer relationship with Israel today than we've ever had in the past. So, is this how you see it, or are we reading too much into how this delegation has been composed?
Delegations can have, long-term historical memory. It's possible this will also fade. Obviously, this is a period of considerable trauma for Iran. India does have this advantage of having a ceremonial presidency and vice presidency. Those make them sort of perfect positions to lead, delegations to funerals. I have no doubt that the esteemed Governor Bahar is a very good member of some prospective Indian delegation. The question is whether he should be the senior most member of that delegation. Historically, it has not been uncommon for India to send external affairs ministers for this function. Instead, my understanding is India went down, a level to the minister of state for that position, going to the talks. Now, whether that decision to have a kind of a senior but still mid-level and certainly not an international brand name as India's representative is about Washington versus New Delhi's own contemporary sympathies with Iran's adversaries. That I think only those in South Bloc can tell you the answer. I believe that if anything, the prime minister has a closer relationship to both the leader of the UAE, Mbz, as well as Netanyahu in Israel, than he does with Trump, and his desire to maintain what is a very important strategic axis for India may be higher on his mind than the U.S. president. After all, Pakistan feels as if it can send a very senior, the very top of the leadership hierarchy to go to the funeral without fear of American recriminations. So I think there are other strategic calculations at play rather than just the mercurial Donald Trump.
Sure, but my question to that would be that I think, for instance, India has had this now a very good relationship with the UAE for many years. A lot of it has to do with Mr. Modi himself. Uh, I'm sure the UAE would understand that India has its own strategic and diplomatic interests in keeping a good relationship with Iran. So, you really think that they would have grudged the Indian vice president leading, let's say, an all party delegation rather than this fragmented sort of individuals who are now going to represent India?
It strikes me as being a calculated snub to the Iranian invitation. it is calculated to the extent that the governor is both an esteemed person who has connections to Iran that make sense, and is high on the order of precedence that governs rankings internationally of these sorts of individuals. But it is not a brand name, and it is and India can calculate how the effect of those things. And it is my assessment that India is entering into a period where it will have more distant Iran relations, and that is partially because of U.S. sanctions concerns. It is partially because of how Pakistan has played this crisis, and it is partially because India has made a set of strategic bets, but also a set of calculations in terms of India's own domestic politics, where Iran will have a less meaningful role. And I think this delegation is consistent with a less meaningful role for Iran in India's foreign policy.
I think that's an interesting point. Ambassador Srivastava, do you agree with that assessment that India has now laid its strategic bets elsewhere, and that's very clearly being reflected in the events of the last few months leading up to now?
I beg to differ. India's policy will become clearer in coming months, especially if we resume purchase of Iranian crude oil. I keep coming back to this point because Iran needs money for reconstruction, and India is one of their main exporters, crude oil. They used to export up to 20%. Before I joined, during my time, it was around uh, still, about 10% of India's crude oil purchase from all sources. So that is important. We also have to factor in that Iran at this stage is going through a period of transition. They have shown their capacity to stand up to American pressure, but they also have to work their way through post-war canvas in the Middle East, and that involves improving their relations with the Arab neighbors. And this will be a major consideration for us because we have relations with both sides of the Gulf. I,
But
for one,
haven't you seen a clear tilt though in Indian foreign policy? A clear, I mean, a very sort of pro-Israel, pro-America tilt is it's there. We can see it. The prime minister was in Israel on the eve of this war. We didn't even condemn the Iranian supreme leader's killing when it happened. We then belatedly signed a condolence book.
uh, there are different ways of looking at it. I'm not part of the government. I would have probably done it differently, but my views don't matter. What is important is how we take forward our relationship with this whole region. And that is important to remember. We are not looking simply at Iran, but we are looking at the wider region. And this also involves our Arab friends. We have equally deep relationship with Saudi Arabia, with Oman, with UAE. I have served in Saudi Arabia. People forget that till mid-50s, Indian rupee was the official tender in Saudi Arabia. And King Saud, his first visit to the subcontinent was to India, not to Pakistan. So we have a lot of equities on the other side of the Gulf, and we will like to see improvement and relations between the two sides.
Dr. Waiel Awwad, though, one final point I wanted to raise was then, the moral question, which is that, and I understand where Ambassador Srivastava is coming from. India has interests with multiple countries in the region, and it's a complicated web. At the same time, though, when it comes to this particular war, there was a clear aggressor from one side. It was the U.S. It was Israel. Uh, this was an unnecessary and unprovoked war, and therefore does morality matter in foreign policy, taking a moral position, or is India being pragmatic in how it's dealing with this? Dr. Awad, have we lost you? I think we just lost his connection. Professor Clary, I'll take that to you.
Can hear you.
Morality and international politics.
I think the professor may have rejoined us, but I'm happy to answer the
Both of
question.
you, yeah. Both of you, yeah.
Let me go first, and then I want to hear what my colleague has to say. India is staking out its own leadership brand, right? So this is evident in the external affairs minister's books. He's now written multiple books about this brand, and part of that brand historically has been that India will take a principled stance in international politics while defending India's interest, and that focus on principles, on the rules-based order, has diminished in recent years. I think as India's power makes it calculate that it no longer needs rules to protect it. It's now sufficiently powerful to protect itself. That's a branding choice, and that's also a choice about what best advances India's interest. And I understand the calculations that Indian decision makers have made. But it is notable to me as a student of Indian diplomacy that one might have expected the role that India played in the Korean War, where it felt it could help bridge a gap between the People's Republic of China and the United States by serving as a trusted interlocutor, that India hasn't attempted to perform that role in this conflict, that it's allowed Pakistan to kind of step up into that position. And that may be something that characterizes Indian diplomacy going forward, that there is a more clear-cut calculation about where India's interests are, and a willingness to have some sharp elbows as it pursues them, even if old friends like Iran get poked in the side in the process.
That's probably true of American foreign policy today as well, because it's so transactional under Trump, and probably not very different from what you're saying. So, Dr. Awad, your take on that? Does morality matter? Maybe I'm stupid to ask this question, but one has to ask, should India have taken a stand, and where does India go from here in its relationship with Iran, in its relationship with different countries in the region?
Well, I believe maybe if we wanted to argue that India took the middle path in such kind of a situation, I would say that Indian autonomic strategy, which they have been talking about, and the pragmatism and the Indian foreign policy phase does not fit into this calculation. I must say it and I must admit it, and my personal own view on this. Because if you talk of civilizational link, you have the strongest link with Iran. You had more than 600 years of the Persian language being taught till the colonial British came and they changed it. And that's what the deep relation rooted in between the two countries, and you are natural extension into the Persia even before the creation of Pakistan. So all this matters because India's cooperation with Iran in the Chabahar, in the security energy, in buying, and Iran used to give even before the war. You remember, used to give the most lenient way of Indian buying the oil, and I think Ambassador will agree with me that they used to have an LC or a paying a dime for 90 days, which nobody can give any other company. So Indian company were quite happy with the deal that Iranian have been doing with them. So that doesn't matter because you are doing it because you pragmatism and you change the face and you have a new friends in the on the corridor. The symbolic things you could do is you could declare one day mourning for the death of a religious leader killed by illegal way, illegitimate, and he is not even, by all means, he was murdered and assaulted, and all his children, grandchild, 12 months old, was killed. And that is the only symbolic you could give, not only for Indian people, to the rest of the world, that India neighbor matters, Indian sentiment matters, India respect for the international charters and the international law matters a lot. So it doesn't make any sense. But the problem with India and this particular issue is that Trump is the president. Had it been other president of the United States, they would have understood the Indian position. But we have a bully in the White House who could react and react very viciously against India, especially at the time when the talk is on. So I believe this middle path of things, it may not fall nicely with the Iranian, Because Iran's selling the oil now, 90% of the Iranian oil goes to China. Chabahar is India doesn't go, they will give it to China. So India is losing its strategic depth in this part of the world, despite the fact that maybe Iran under compulsion. But trust me, Iran is not under compulsion. The more dangerous part is this, I believe, is, and let me say it here also, that India maybe believe that the war is not over yet. The 60 days is an interim period, and there is going to be a catastrophe in the coming months because the United States, according to our report we are getting, and Israel are preparing for a major assault in India, in Iran, and they will not leave Iran. So therefore, I think India has to fasten its belt and the rest of Asia and the rest of the world.
I think anything is possible at this point. And they say, you know what they say about bullies. If you don't stand up to them, they'll keep on beating you. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us, Ambassador Srivastava, Dr. Waiel Awwad, Professor Clary. It was great to have this conversation, a story we continue to follow very, very closely. And that's it on India and the world this week. We'll be back with much more on the next episode next week. Join us then.